sure he has a nickname for me. All right. So you can ask him what he means by his nicknames.
I don't believe we'll ever have a fair election again. I don't believe it.
And that was former President Trump Saturday night in Michigan with the midterms just a little over 5 weeks away. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns coming to you from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with President Biden's visit to Puerto Rico today. Mr. Biden had pledged not to abandon the island as it rebuilds after Hurricane Fiona. He committed more than $60 million in federal funds to help the U.S. territory.
Ever since the hurricane struck, Jill and I have had people in Puerto Rico on our minds and in our prayers. We came here in person to show that we're with you. All of America is with you as you receive and recover and rebuild.
For more on this, Major Garrett joins us from the White House. He's, of course, CBS News chief Washington correspondent. Major, hi, good to see you there. So what was President Biden's goal by going down to Puerto Rico?
Well, to do what the president can do in a moment like this, focus national attention on an area of the country, Puerto Rico in this case, recovering from a massive natural disaster. Not Ian. The country is understandably focused on Ian and the wrath that it put through Florida and parts of South Carolina. We'll get to that story in just a second. But this is about Hurricane Fiona. And the $60 million you referenced is to make Puerto Rico more flood and storm resilient in the future. Now, $60 million, that's not a huge amount of money. The FEMA administrator, Deanne Criswell, told reporters traveling with the president to Puerto Rico it will cost billions to improve the resilience and infrastructure in Puerto Rico after Fiona. And we should pause to just note this, Caitlin. After Hurricane Maria 5 years ago, the U.S. government allocated $9.5 billion to improve Puerto Rico's flood and storm resilience then. And what does that mean? That means improving the water system and the resilience of its electrical grid, all of which failed after Hurricane Fiona. But a couple of statistics worth pointing out. Right now, 92 to 93% of Puerto Rico residents have had their power restored. 95% have had their drinking water restored. So there is resilience. There are improvements since Maria, but it is still a fragile island part of the United States, struck again by another natural disaster. And this administration committed not just resources now, but the president said in the future to every need that Puerto Rico will have, he said this administration will do everything in its power to meet.
And Major, I also want to ask about the other hurricane we've all been talking about, which of course was Hurricane Ian. We expect the president to head to Florida later this week. What can you tell us about what we should expect from that visit?
So that's going to be on Wednesday, according to the current White House schedule. And the White House is being very coy about what it is the president will do there other than to reinforce the message of ongoing federal support. And look, it's a really disastrous situation in the parts of Florida hit by Ian. Not only is there still recovery and rescue efforts going on, the death toll continues to mount, but the physical destruction is just enormous, and it's going to be an ongoing week by week, month by month effort. Federal government supporting city and county governments and state governments to try to clean up and restore Florida to something that is resembling its pre-Ian status. Will President Biden see Republican Governor Ron DeSantis? The White House isn't saying so. It would be natural for the two to be there. They have been on constant phone contact since Hurricane Ian struck, and even before that, the White House wants to note. But clearly, Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor, has done things that have caught the attention of this White House, and unfavorably so. I'm thinking of the migrant flights. The White House will not say whether that topic will come up, focusing entirely on what the White House wants to say and represent is a bipartisan need, meaning everyone in Florida needs help right now, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. And the administration wants to do what it can to meet their immediate and long-term needs.
Absolutely. A photo opportunity with the both of them would be fascinating to watch on a variety of different fronts. Major Garrett, thank you from the White House. We appreciate it. For more on President Biden's handling of the hurricanes, the economy, pretty much everything else, we're going to talk to Mark Short. He was previously the chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, and he's the director of legislative affairs for former President Trump. He's currently Mr. Pence's senior advisor. Mark, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about the hurricane just quickly, because this is often a test of presidential leadership, but it's also a test for governors who are head of states. What could this mean for someone like DeSantis, who potentially has ambitions beyond the governorship?
Well, Caitlin, I think that you need to show a certain amount of compassion for the victims of a hurricane or a natural disaster of this nature. But I also feel like with significant Republican leadership in Senator Scott, Senator Rubio, and the delegation, he'll probably be able to get support he needs financially for the state. But I think it's also, at this point, it's important to rally around the victims more so than kind of think through the politics of it. And I'm sure there are politics at play, but I think most importantly, if you just do your job, that'll accrue to your benefit.
I also want to ask about January 6th, because we were supposed to have a hearing last week, of course, was postponed for the hurricane. But can you say whether Pence has officially said he's not going to do an interview with the committee?
I think that the vice president on many occasions expressed his reservations about participation in the committee because of great concerns about separation of powers here. And I don't think there's any sort of precedent for a vice president testifying under these circumstances. There have been a couple times where vice presidents have testified to Congress before, Caitlin, but never about their private conversations with the president. And if you go down that path, I think it's going to create an enormous challenge for future president-vice president relationships if the concern is that that person can always be brought before Congress to testify. And again, I think, as I pointed out on a couple of occasions, you do have a former vice president who's currently now president of the United States. And I'm not sure that he wants to be forced to testify about dealings that Hunter Biden had with Ukraine when he served as vice president of the United States. So I think there's a lot of historical challenges and constitutional challenges to that.
There is talk in Congress about the reforming how the Electoral Count Act. Would Vice President Pence support the effort in the House? One piece of legislation has been proposed by Liz Cheney. There's a Senate version as well. Would he support either of those? Well,
Caitlin, I don't want to speak for him on that, but I think that what was important to see in both pieces of legislation was just an acknowledgement that the vice president's role is crystal clear in the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act as to what his role is. If Congress can take an extra step of self-policing itself, I think there's probably some merit to that because I don't think that people fully appreciate that in the last 3 Republican presidential victories, there have been Democrats in Congress who have been objected to those results on the floor of the House. And Republicans certainly did that in 2020. And I think that we want states to be the ones certifying their election results. I think as conservatives, we've always appreciated that there is a federalist approach here, and our founders wanted the states to be the ones in charge of their own state elections. Unless there's an extreme case, then there would be opportunity for people in Congress to object. But Democrats, I think, set us on this path. I think Republicans went a step further in 2020. If they need to self-police and control and change, instead of just saying one House member, one senator is required to reach an objection and raise that threshold, I think there's merit to that.
I want to ask about comments that former President Trump made, essentially something that was taken as a death threat against Mitch McConnell. He also issued racist language about Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao. Is that kind of language, can that be
When I saw
condoned?
those tweets at midnight, I sort of assumed the president had taken to drinking at that point. I think that, it's important to remember that Elaine Chao and her family have been strong crusaders against communist China their whole lives. She's devoted herself to that. She spent time outside of government working at Heritage Foundation, fighting the cause for freedom. Her family is actually from Taiwan. I think that that certainly was a misplaced and erroneous tweet, to say the least.
But I've been watching reaction from Republicans, and I really haven't seen any Republicans come to Mitch McConnell's defense or to Elaine Chao's defense. Why not?
Caitlin, I can't speak for them. Again, I think that Elaine Chao has been a strong crusader against communist China. I think the president's factually wrong in his tweet, much less to the notion of him taking a racial slur like that, I think was obviously wrong.
Rick Scott was also asked about this on Face the Nation over the weekend, and he really declined to condemn the remarks. He essentially said Trump has a nickname for everybody, he probably has one for me. Can you kind of take us inside the minds of Republicans and why they won't engage on that? Why they can't criticize the former president in any sort of way? Well,
I don't know that that's the case. I wouldn't go so far as to say Republicans are never willing to confront the president. I do think there's a sense that there's been such enormous bias against the president in mainstream media that perhaps they're overcompensating for that. But again, I don't think there's any place for the tweet that he sent out the other night, and I think it's entirely wrong.
I also want to ask about Mike Pence and the way that he's been out on the campaign trail for other candidates, but he's also been engaged engaging on the issue of abortion access, abortion rights, abortion laws. And, you know, I find it really interesting because we've seen a lot of Republicans kind of shy away from the issue, and this is something that Mike Pence is kind of tackling head on. Does he essentially think that Republicans have ceded ground on the issue?
I think if you get through his entire public career, he's been a strong advocate for life. And he is one of the champion for making sure that taxpayer funding doesn't support abortions through Planned Parenthood throughout his time in Congress. He certainly was an advocate for many of the new justices that were nominated to the Supreme Court and across our federal court system. He's an outspoken believer that our party should be standing for life. And that's not really a political calculation. That's based on principle. In many cases, I think we associate it similar to still the civil rights fight of our era. And in many cases, you know, 60 years ago, it actually took 60 years to overturn Plessy v. Ferguson and have Brown versus Board of Education ruled correctly. And we think that 50 years later after Roe v. Wade, we finally ruled correctly. And that will accrue to Republican benefit if they stand firm for life in the long term. We should be a party that champions the culture of life, not champions the culture of death. And I think that's where we need to be standing firm.
Would Vice President Pence, if he were running for president, or if not, would he support a federal ban on abortion? He's
always advocated for life in every circumstance. And I think that if you look at it, Caitlin, you know, where our country was prior to overturning Roe v. Wade is we were more aligned with China and North Korea with our abortion policy. If you look at across Europe, 47 out of 50 countries have a baseline of at least stopping abortions after 15 weeks, in most cases about 12 weeks. The United States was the one that was out of sync. And so, you know, there's a lot of politics around the Dobbs decision at the moment. But what hasn't happened is Democrats really being put on the position to say, what limitations are you for? Because it doesn't seem at this point they're for any limitations, which is not where the mainstream of America is. Only about 10% of Americans support abortion till the very end. And that's where the Democrat Party is today.
A lot of Republicans, though, have said, look, this is a state's issue. Would the former vice president think that a federal, you know, the federal government weighing in on it is the right way to go on this issue?
He's a champion for the right to life and believes that that's something that our founders put in declaration and made sure that it was protected. And so, yes, he believes that we should be fighting for the right to life, period.
I also just wanted to ask quickly, because the Pence is out on the campaign trail. He's campaigning for a lot of candidates. He's raising a lot of money for candidates. Is he supporting anybody who has denied the election results of 2020?
There are candidates, well, I guess that depends on your definition of denying the election results. I think there are candidates who voted against certification in the House that he has certainly continued to support. And I think if you look to his letter to the American people back on January 6th, what he wrote is to say that it's Congress's right to object. That's what the electoral count provided. And so, again, there have been Republican and Democrats' objections to the last 4 presidential elections. And he believes that is their right, even if he doesn't agree with them on that particular vote. And so he's continued to campaign and support candidates who voted against certification in 2020, sure.
All right, Mark Short, thank you very much. I know we'll be talking to you a lot over the next few weeks and beyond. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And earlier this summer, Democrats were optimistic about their party holding the Senate. Why it's Republicans who are feeling a little bit better about their prospects with just over 5 weeks to go. You're watching Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices. What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Free Speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free Speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
when weather turns extreme.
The 150-mile-per-hour hurricane is still churning north.
Every second counts.
Massive and rapidly intensifying.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Well over 9 feet. This is not survivable.
You'll have time to get prepared.
You want to have the advantage on severe weather days.
It just may save your life.
CBS News and extreme weather. Feel the forecast.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm here for you. Take an orange?
Cheers.
You do? Here. America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing?
Beyond this gate is actually the border with Ukraine.
We've seen people not just opening their hearts to Ukrainian refugees, but their homes.
Where will you go?
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns, and I'm joined now by Robert Costa, our friend and colleague. He's, of course, CBS News Chief Campaign and Election Correspondent. Bob, good to see you. Happy Monday. I wanted to ask, I know you were listening to that interview that we just did with Mark Short. You know him very well. You know Mike Pence and have been covering him for a while. What were some of your takeaways?
It was an intriguing interview, and really enjoyed hearing that conversation you had with Mark Short, because former Vice President Pence, clearly based on this conversation, this interview, is moving toward a possible 2024 presidential run. And he's trying to build his base inside the Republican Party. As you noted, he's going to his home state of Indiana, where he now lives, on Tuesday night to speak to a group there going to likely talk about abortion rights and his opposition to abortion rights. And you see him navigating a changing Republican Party, but a Republican Party that in many respects still echoes what he saw and was guiding when he was in the Trump administration as vice president. Socially conservative, but there are other options out there beyond Vice President Pence. Former President Trump, of course, considering another run for the White House. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, very much in the Pence persona politically when it comes to socially conservative positions.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see Pence engage on the issue of abortion. And as you listen to Mark Short, essentially saying this is where he's been for a while. And there actually aren't a lot of Republicans out there kind of celebrating the overturning of Roe that you might imagine after 4 decades of campaigning for that kind of thing. But you mentioned Trump, because obviously Pence and Trump served in the administration together, but they were very and are very different, have very different characters, to say the least. I want to ask about Trump's comments that he made about McConnell, the kind of what was seen as a death threat, the racist comments about his wife. You know, we just haven't seen Republicans criticize him at all. Is it kind of that's baked in at this point, and they just don't want to focus on any feuds? What do you make of all of that? And why is he going after McConnell?
He can't stand Leader McConnell. It goes back to how McConnell handled January 6th and laid a lot of the blame on then-President Trump's shoulders for his role in his rhetoric ahead of the Capitol attack and his action or lack of action during the Capitol attack. And that animosity has continued ever since 2021, even though they did politically do a lot together. A transactional bond politically in the sense that they overhauled the federal judiciary, installed many conservative judges across the federal judiciary. What you're seeing now inside the Republican Party is a recognition that Trump remains an extremely combative political figure. And there's a reluctance, whether it's Senator Scott or former Vice President Pence, to have direct combat with him politically. knowing that he still commands a base, even if it has diminished in some ways. He still is out there on the campaign trail, unusual for a former president. And they all want to try to build their own political capital without having a war with Trump. Now, that may become impossible if Trump begins to run for the nomination in 2024. And if you want that nomination as well, you're eventually going to perhaps have to take him on directly. But for now, you see them all avoiding the firefight. But that enables Trump to be out there, whether it's with these embraces of QAnon, the conspiracy theory, or this hurtful rhetoric about former Secretary Chow, Leader McConnell, using this kind of loaded, racist, explosive characterization creates a political climate that's highly charged, and Republicans, for the most part, are quite quiet about it.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see, how Republicans do in this midterm, because I think all of those kind of candidates in waiting are waiting to see whether Trump's candidates do well or don't do well, and whether that gives them some room to run against him remains to be seen. But I do want to also ask about Democrats, because I'm curious about, if there are any Democrats kind of waiting to see what Biden does in 2024. I just was in North Carolina and interviewed Sherry Beasley, who's running for Senate there, and I believe that we have a bite. I asked her if she wants Biden to run again. Do you want the president to run again?
I don't think he's going to call to ask me. And what I know is that 41 days from now, we will have an election that will be critical for North Carolina and for this country. And it is so important for people to take this election very seriously and to be thinking about the fact that there is a clear choice in this race. We can have someone like Congressman Ted Budd, who's been in Congress for 6 years and who has voted against the interest of the people here in the state, or we can have somebody who is going to stand up for what's right and who will call out what's wrong and who will lead courageously in the very same way that I've led in my nearly 30 years of service to the people of North Carolina.
So she's essentially saying, I'm not going to weigh in there. But you had Bernie Sanders last week on CBS Mornings. What does this all mean for Biden?
Well, so telling how she brings it right back to the Republican Ted Budd. Doesn't want to talk so much about the speculation on 2024. A disciplined candidate right there.
Yes, absolutely.
What you see right now in the Democratic Party is a belief that President Biden is going to run for re-election. Yes, he's the oldest president we've had. At the same time, he is someone many Democrats believe has achieved a lot in terms of policy. And as a Biden friend once told me, I've repeated this before, the friend said, a fish swims, birds fly, and Biden runs for president. That's just the way of life. Since 1988, and really going back to when he was first elected to the Senate in 1972, this has been a man on the American political scene who has thought about the presidency. Now he has the presidency. He's thought about it. He's run for it 1988, 2008, 2020. You don't just walk away if you have that kind of thing you've worked your life for. But at the same time, many Democrats, like Gavin Newsom of California, former Senator Sanders, and others are thinking about what would the Democratic Party field look like for president in 2023, 2024, if President Biden decides not to run. But all of his allies continue to tell me in CBS News that Biden is moving toward a run. And the other complicating factor, if you are an ambitious Democrat, Vice President Harris, just like could be someone who you're going to have to run against. That could be difficult.
That's very interesting. And like I said about Republicans, it'll be interesting to see how Democrats do this cycle. And if they do better than expected, maybe they'll lay off Biden. If they do worse than expected, maybe that gives some others.
No one's talking about a primary challenge yet.
Not a primary challenge, but maybe putting a little pressure on. Bob, always good to see you. Thanks for your reporting and for sharing your notes with us. And we'll talk to you soon. The Supreme Court began a new session today with public faith in the high court at the lowest it's been in years. What cases are on the horizon and how the conservative nature of the court could impact future rulings. You're streaming Red and Blue.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The 150-mile-per-hour hurricane is still churning north.
every second counts.
Massive and rapidly intensifying.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Well over 9 feet. This is not survivable.
You'll have time to get prepared.
You want to have the advantage on severe weather days.
It just may save your life.
CBS News and extreme weather. Feel the forecast.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now.
We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got
We
it.
share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm here for you. Take an orange? Yes. You do? Here.
America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing?
Beyond this gate is actually the border with Ukraine.
We've seen people not just opening their hearts to Ukrainian refugees, but their homes.
Where will you go?
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. The Supreme Court was back in session today for its new fall term. It marks the first day on the bench for new Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who of course became the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. Over the next few months, the court will decide on cases concerning voting rights, election law, and LGBTQ rights. It also comes as the previous term, of course, ended with that big ruling overturning Roe v. Wade. That set off a wave of abortion bans nationwide. So for more, I'm joined by CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. Jan, good to see you. How's it going?
Great to be here. Happy first Monday.
Happy first Monday. So you are going to be even busier over the next few weeks and months. Could we see any other big bombshells like we saw with the Roe decision?
Sure. Certainly in the cases this term, I think as consequential as last term was, and we're seeing the impact of the decision overturning Roe kind of across the country, not only in state legislatures, but in some of these elections that we've been monitoring. There are other cases on the docket this term that have the potential to be maybe not quite that explosive, but equally controversial, including cases on race. A big case tomorrow they're going to hear on voting rights from the state of Alabama, a case at the end of the month on the use of affirmative action and college admissions from Harvard and the University of North Carolina. So again, the court, after they took on the cases that really galvanized the women's rights movement last term, they had a gun case last term. So those kind of big hot button issues, they're back this term taking up what not very controversial, right? Race, voting rights. And of course that LGBTQ law in Colorado and whether that runs afoul of people's free speech rights.
So a lot to watch on that front. We've also seen the view of the court essentially take a nosedive. Gallup poll had faith in the court at its lowest point ever, around 47%. Have the justices weighed in on any of this, on this dynamic at all?
Sure, we've seen them kind of speak out this summer. You saw the Chief Justice at a speech in Colorado kind of talking about how just because people criticize the decisions, it doesn't mean that calls into question the basic legitimacy of the court. But then we saw liberal Justice Elena Kagan saying, well, the court doesn't have to be wading into all these hot button issues all the time. So maybe it's the court's doing too. We've seen the court take hits to its kind of legitimacy before, after Bush versus Gore took a hit in the polls, but then it kind of recovered, and these are lifetime appointments. The question, though, now is this is another explosive term. You're not going to have that cooling off period that sometimes we see after big terms. They're just jumping right into it, like you said, with that new justice, and who knows what other cases they'll take as the term continues. This is just the first. But they're not shying away from controversial cases just because they think they may not be popular.
Well, that's the interesting point, and it's still a 6-3 court, as you've mentioned before. I do want to ask about Judge Jackson, because this was her first day, and you were in the room. Did she give any sense of how she'll serve?
Yes. I mean, she wasted no time in making her voice heard. She peppered lawyers on both sides of the issue with questions throughout the arguments, really making her voice heard. So it was interesting to see her jumping right in. If you looked at that Supreme Court with those 9 justices, you would have never guessed she was new today.
Very interesting. Well, I know you'll be following all of that for us, and it's good to see you in person. I appreciate your time, Jan. Thank you. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of